Hey, Chris from Switch Weekly here, and today we're going to go through just some of the highlights from the State of Switch survey for 2022. It's an annual questionnaire I put together to check the pulse of the Nintendo community and see what you all think about the Switch, its library of games, and, well, Nintendo in general. This is the fifth year I've been running this survey, and it always proves fascinating to kind of put together and offers up some kind of real insights, interesting insights into what folks really think of Nintendo's hybrid machine. Let's dive in and see what you all have to say about the Switch half a decade on. So, 5 years in and over 100 million units sold, the Switch success story is a fascinating turnaround from Kyoto's House of Mario, especially when you compare it to the Wii U era. The contrast is stark.
Wii U is in stores now for just $299.99. Just look for the U on the box.
Nintendo took a risk with this hybrid machine, and it's kind of easy to forget it was a bold change for the company to put all their eggs into one hardware basket, moving away from the multi-pillar approach they've taken over the past near 30 years. Of course, we know the bet paid off for Nintendo, as over half a decade on, the Switch is a hugely vibrant platform, with consistently healthy sales, a massive library of diverse titles, and an ever-evolving product offering, all of which seem to show little signs of slowing down. Now, sales figures only tell half the story, of course, and this is where the State of Switch survey comes in. It aims to kind of like shine a light on the real day-to-day user experience of players, highlighting the overall perception, usage, and ultimately enjoyment of the wider Nintendo Switch system. Alright, so if you want to read the results in full, you can find them over on the Switch Weekly website. It's a massive write-up going through each and every question, and their accompanying answers. It took me a while to go through and kind of dig into all the data. I'm biased, of course, but I'd say if you like digging into this kind of stuff, it's well worth a read. Consider this video your kind of like TLDR on the whole thing. Let's get into some highlights. Right, so what's stopping those who don't own a Switch yet? It's been 5 years, so what's the most kind of common holdup? Well, it's price. 60% of those answering this question detailed that the current Switch price points are not attractive to them. In fact, folks felt the Switch family of products are generally between kind of like $60 to $80 too expensive. Here's what prices people want to see the Switch at. $220 for the regular model, it's currently $299. $140 for the Switch Lite, which is currently available for around $179, and $275 for the latest OLED model, which is marked up at about $349 right now. Beyond price, a fair few Switch holdouts said they wanted to see a hardware revision of some sort before jumping in. Like, do we reckon they're kind of adamantly waiting for that long-rumoured Switch Pro? I don't know. So before we move on from looking into some more data from those who actually own a Switch, let me quickly tell you about today's sponsor, Premium Edition Games. They focus on releasing a growing range of physical Switch titles, all of which are perfect for collectors and retro fans alike. Their mantra is modern retro, done right. So far they've released the likes of Cathedral, Super Blood Hockey, Demon's Tier, and more. Each release comes with a game on a physical cart, double-sided art on the retail case, an instruction booklet inside, remember those, and more. There's a link in the description if you want to find out more, and they are over at premiumeditiongames.com. A huge thanks to Premium Edition Games for sponsoring this video and the 2022 survey. Right, so back to it. Here's some stats from actual Switch owners who make up the bulk of the kind of survey respondents, of course. Now, to give you an idea, of those answering, around 87% have the original Switch model, myself included, with just under 15% saying they own a Lite. A rather impressive 22% said they already have the OLED model. I found this to be quite the endorsement for the new hardware, especially when comparing to the Lite, because the Lite's been on the market now for like over 30 months versus the OLED's roughly like 5 or 6, so it's impressive to see such a take-up here for like the refreshed model, especially for what was considered to be a nice but by no means essential upgrade on the original hardware. Of course, take this and many of the points raised here in context. This is no doubt an enthusiast crowd answering the survey. These are Nintendo fans filling it out. They're going to be keen on any new hardware. Sticking with the OLED model real quick, I asked those with the new hardware which variant they went for, and the white model is clearly the favourite here. 86% of those with the OLED model have the white version. A clear winner, and to be fair, it does look kind of nice. Next up, I asked a bunch of questions about software. A typical Switch owner will own around 35 games, and that's a mix of kind of like roughly 50-50 when it comes to physical versus digital. I'm always surprised that the digital share isn't higher here, especially when you consider just how much of the Switch's vast library of over like 5,000 games is digital only. Switch fans love to buy physical still, it seems. So, what titles did they actually pick up last year? A massive nearly 40% of those answering the survey said they grabbed Pokemon Legends Arceus. This is an impressive amount when you consider that the game had been available for like less than a month at the time the survey went live. It's doubly impressive when you kind of stack it against the stats for the 2021 Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl releases, as only 22% and 14% respectively picked up those chibi remasters. 50% of respondents said they grabbed Metroid Dread. It's well established now that this is one of the all-time best sellers in the long-running series, so it's great to kind of see that reflected here. Only around 10% of folks said they got Game Builder Garage. Remember that game? Right, next are some stats on folks' most played games on Switch. The all-time #1 response? Well, it's The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's kind of crazy that the game was the kind of game that was there day one over 5 years ago still takes the top spot here. We have all sunk kind of like countless hours into exploring this version of Hyrule. The game has such lasting appeal, clearly, which is kind of evident by the countless videos you see kind of still doing the rounds on Twitter of someone pulling off something insane which you kind of didn't think was possible. The fact we're still making these discoveries in this game, kind of like half a decade on, is just a real testament to just how good it is. Breath of the Wild is undoubtedly the Switch's greatest. So, whilst Zelda takes the top spot across all playtime, what about the last year? Well, I also asked what game people had played the most throughout 2021. The top response here? Well, it was Animal Crossing New Horizons. Yes, this kind of like game of the pandemic, as I think it'll be remembered as, has got some clear kind of staying power. Despite the kind of sporadic updates, Switch players continue to pour hours into this island getaway, and it took the top playtime spot much to the satisfaction of our pal, Tom Nook. Real quickly, I kind of asked about genres and what people thought were kind of lacking on the Switch. I said kind of, which genre do you think is most lacking on Switch? And by far, shooters were the top answer. Whether it's like an FPS or a third-person shooter, people want to see more titles on the hybrid. Maybe Microsoft will bring Call of Duty over. Beyond shooter games, folks also felt that racing and sports games are kind of like underrepresented on the Switch. Would you agree? Kind of let me know in the comments, because I can see why they say that. So about cloud games, a massive like 95% of respondents said that they hadn't bought one of these titles on the Switch yet. Think games such as like Hitman 3, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and those Kingdom Hearts games. It's clear cloud tech like this is going to have an increased presence in the future of gaming, no doubt. But one thing is for sure, the model on Switch isn't quite right just yet. It's clear from these stats that the right approach hasn't been found yet, and that right now the offering is not a compelling one to consumers. Next up, you know how like the Switch is region free and you can play games from like anywhere in the world, whether it's like physical or digital? Well, the majority of Switch users do not make use of this fact. Only 42% said they actually have played a game from a region other than their own. Have you done this? Most folks kind of do it to grab a game that's not available in their region, or to get it cheaper, or kind of get earlier, for example. Next up was a few things that kind of like around how you play your Switch. And on average, a typical week, a kind of Switch user will play their console for just over 6 hours. This is slightly up on last year's figure, which is a good sign, I feel, for a console that's now in its 6th year. People are still engaged with this machine. As for how they play, well, TV mode is the top preference, but only just. As you can see, just over 50% said this is how they most often play. I'm very much on team handheld. As for controllers, well, the Pro controller is clearly the favourite here. Over 70% said this is how they choose to play when they're not playing in handheld. Okay, moving on to Switch Online. Over 90% of those answering the survey said they are Switch Online members. I mean, you kind of have to be if you want to play online, so it's a little surprised to see such a high take-up with what is essentially an enthusiast crowd answering this survey. However, of those paying members, only roughly 30% said they opted to pay for the new, pricier expansion pack. The things on offer here have not convinced the majority to upgrade. Yet. Nearly 70% said the basic membership is good value for money, but only 45% said they felt the same for the expansion pack tier. So, about how you kind of spend your money when you're playing on Switch. Switch owners will, on average, spend around $60 a month on gaming. Makes perfect sense, as this is typically the cost of kind of like one full-price game. With so many games on the Switch, I also asked kind of about the dreaded backlog, and over 40% detailed how they are now buying fewer games as a result of their backlog. I know I've got plenty of games I still need to finish, so I kind of get it. The Switch's library is huge, so it's no surprise that people are kind of holding off when they might have like, you know, a dozen games kind of sat in the backlog that they haven't had a chance to get to yet. So, Joy-Con drift. A massive near 70% of respondents have suffered from Joy-Con drift. This isn't going away. Year after year, I see a massive number of those filling out this survey detail that they've experienced drift, sometimes more than once. For the most part, Nintendo are fixing these for free, but to see this issue kind of drag on year is a real disappointment. People want this fixed. It was listed as the #1 hardware improvement folks want to see. I'd kind of love to see Nintendo step up here, kind of own the problem and just sort it. However costly. I mean, if Microsoft can do it like they did with the Xbox 360, so can Nintendo. Last year, Nintendo oddly kind of added Bluetooth audio support to the Switch. Now, I personally was like thrilled to see this addition because even if it was like a little bewildered to see it showing up so late in the hardware's life, it was still kind of nice to see. So I asked about this, and less than half of Switch users have actually used this sweet feature. 44.6% said they had paired Bluetooth headphones to the Switch. 5 years in, maybe it takes a lot to kind of change these pre-existing habits, but I know I'm using it. Right, so this final set of answers kind of digs into the future. I asked which single Nintendo franchise folks feel is missing most from the Switch library. Now, thankfully, we've kind of had plenty of series come to the Switch with great entries. You know, the Switch has had such a great library from Nintendo. So the list here may not surprise you. F-Zero was top. I honestly think kind of like a Battle Royale style game would be so cool here. Like, hear me out. Imagine like an online death race with like 98 other racers on the track, and you have to use your skills to kind of nudge them off and race them out the you know, beat them out the race. F-Zero 99. Make it happen, Nintendo, please. Anyway, I digress. Other series folks want to see on the Switch include Star Fox, Golden Sun, and Kid Icarus, and plenty of others. Like I said at the top of the video, there is much more detail in the full report, so do go and check that out. As for third-party franchises, well, for the 4th year running now, Persona is the top request. Yeah, sure, we've had the likes of like Strikers and Arena Ultimax, but folks want the real mainline series. What gives, Atlas? Beyond Persona, folks want more Final Fantasy, like Tactics and the Pixel remasters. Metal Gear Solid was a popular response here, along with Fallout and Dude Bro Shooter Call of Duty. Next was the question about if you had to pick one game that was your most anticipated on Switch, what would you say? It's the sequel to the Breath of the Wild, isn't it? Yeah, the Legend of Zelda sequel, the sequel to the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, I thought so. This was by far the most popular response here. Metroid Prime 4 and Splatoon 3 are also highly anticipated. Right, so kind of kicking back to the Switch hardware. Most folks want to see the Switch supported for another 6 years. This would take the Switch into like 2028, and although that kind of sounds insane, it does line up with the comments made by Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa. He said the Switch is in like the middle of its life cycle, which would place the Switch at having like an expected 10-year life cycle. How they keep the interest in the platform for another half decade will be interesting, but it's clear there is an appetite for it. One thing's for sure though, whatever is next, most folks, near 70% in fact, say it's extremely important that the Switch successor be backwards compatible. I close things out by asking folks to rate the Switch platform on a 5-point scale. I asked respondents how satisfied they are with the Nintendo Switch console. The average response lands at a rather good 4.4 out of 5. Pretty darn great, I'd say, for a console that's 5 years in. Interest and engagement clearly remain high, and if you compare it to the Wii U, well, Nintendo was already shutting up shop on the tablet project. Here's just a few comments from folks with their thoughts on the Switch. Right, so that's a wrap on just some of the highlights. As I've mentioned, the full report has much more detail. So go take a look at that. It's over at switchweekly.com/survey/2022. And whilst you're there, you should totally subscribe to my free weekly Nintendo email so you get a heads up about next year's survey. If you don't know, my weekly email shares a ton of great Nintendo reads from all across the web, and it shares a list of what games are coming out in the week ahead. If you enjoyed this video, then please do hit like and consider subscribing. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on the Switch in 2022. Thanks for watching.